And welcome to At Issue. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. Normally I would open by saying what we're going to discuss for the next half hour, but I was afraid that if I said we're going to talk about the Farm Bill, the huge Farm Bill that was just passed by the Congress, I was afraid that if we talked about the Livestock Management Facilities Act, that those kinds of topics might say to at least city dwellers, we're going to talk about what? And I think you'll want to pay attention to that conversation because we're going to hear how it impacts all of us from the president of the Illinois Farm Bureau. He is Richard Guebert, and he is the new president of the Farm Bureau.
Yes, and thank you, H, for allowing me to be here this evening and speak to your listeners.
A little bit of background, you are a farmer from Randolph County?
From Randolph County in southwestern Illinois. We farm with my son and a 34-year employee. We raise corn, wheat, and soybeans in the Mississippi River bottoms.
And let's start with that Farm Bill. More than 2 years in the making from the United States Congress. The part of the Farm Bill, now we're not going to talk about SNAP. You may know that as food stamps, and that's a portion of the Farm Bill, but it really doesn't directly impact farmers. So let's talk about what is the change for, at least for wheat, corn, and bean farmers in terms of the insurance program, because we've known farmers to get subsidies. I don't know if that's a good word or a bad word in your mind, and now it's changing a little bit?
Changing quite a bit. Two things. One, all the direct payments are gone in what we know in the last several farm bills. And over 4 years ago, Illinois Farm Bureau put together a farm policy task force. And what we looked at, what do Illinois farmers want in this next upcoming Farm Bill? And they came up with their number one priority is that crop insurance is our priority for Illinois farmers. It's used as a risk management tool in our everyday farming operations and gives us the opportunity to have an insurance that at least in a disaster like there was in 2012, the drought of 2012, is that we can recoup a portion of our input costs.
Now, crop insurance existed prior to this bill. I mean, you could get up to 85% coverage?
Yes, depending on what the policy that you wanted. The government assisted farmers in 65% level of coverage, and then farmers would buy up at whatever level they wanted, whether it be 70, 80, 75%, 85% levels, and then you paid extra premium for that buy-up of crop insurance for either corn, wheat, or soybeans that I'm most familiar with.
And then the new Farm Bill allows that to move up an additional 10% with a little different program.
Quite a different, there's two different types of programs that when farmers sign up late fall, early winter, to choose between a what we call an ARC program, which is a revenue-based program, and then another program with a crop loss program. And then depending on which program you choose, you have the opportunity to buy up to 90% level of coverage. Most farmers do not take it because it's very, very expensive. But you may find some specialty growers that may want to have that because of the high cost of putting that crop out.
As I talked about at the beginning of the program, for the city dweller, why should the city dweller just worry about this Farm Bill at all?
Farmers have always, for decades, provided a safe, abundant food supply to the consumer. And years ago, it was basically here in the United States. But now we're in a world market where we supply fuel or food to anyone all throughout the world. And we're seeing different countries and different consumers in those countries have more disposable income to buy protein that they want in their diets.
You alluded very briefly to fuel. Let's talk about fuel. Corn in particular. The renewable fuel standards set by the EPA, the U.S. EPA, the EPA is looking at changing those standards. They had been set several years ago for the foreseeable future. They were based upon the amount of fuel that they thought cars were going to be using. That has changed due to the economy, also changed due to the fact that we have better miles per gallon in our vehicles. So the EPA is saying we should scale back somewhat on the projected use, not cut it back from its current use, but not have as much of an increase in the use of ethanol. Where's the Farm Bureau stand with regard to that? Because we are using less fuel in America.
Absolutely, we are. We've taken a position, we oppose those, lowering those amounts of renewable fuels to be used going forward. We've, in agriculture, have worked years trying to get the fuel standards and get ethanol where it is today. And it really is a good, renewable, green energy, of which our administration wants us to promote, and we feel that we should not have those standards lowered. We have reached out to the director with letters. We've posted comments in the Federal Register asking the Administrator Gina McCarthy not to lower those standards. And the first part of February, we had a call to action of our members to the White House requesting the President to weigh in and ask Gina McCarthy not to lower those standards. At the same time, we worked with the governor and his staff and other stakeholders here in the state of Illinois asking not to have those standards lowered. And at the same time, we've invited Gina McCarthy to southwestern Illinois to see an ethanol plant, a biodiesel plant, and to visit the research facility at SIU Edwardsville, where she can see of really how well ethanol is doing, not only for Midwest agriculture, but to all of Illinois and the consumers.
I understand that Illinois has 14 plants that produce renewable fuels of one type or another, primarily ethanol. And that's important that they stay in business, that they produce at a certain level to be viable. But when we look at the overall, the use of gasoline in this country is just not increasing at the anticipated rate. And yet you want to continue to use ethanol at an increasing rate. So how is that going to fit into the mix? Are you going to have higher amounts of ethanol in each gallon of gasoline?
Yes, and that's the idea. We have a number of cars that our consumers are using that burn up to 85% ethanol. For the most part, there's a lot of 10% ethanol being used in most cars today. And I believe as cars, new cars come onto the, used by the consumer, that we'll be able to increase that use to 85% ethanol in a vast majority of the automobiles today, as well as biodiesel used in our trucks and our lines. And pickup trucks on the farm or on the highways by construction workers or whoever. And it's good for the environment. It's good for Illinois. It's good for jobs to keep those plants up and running.
Have you talked to the oil companies about this idea?
The oil companies are very well aware of what's going on, but it has reduced our consumption of foreign oil, and that's a goal. Not to rely on foreign oil and use more domesticated oil and renewable fuels.
Let's move to legislation on the state level. House Bill 5637. It is regarding the Livestock Management Facilities Act, which has been in place for quite some time. It's an amendment that they're proposing that would change the way the siting of the large confinement facilities would be operated. Right now, Department of Agriculture has the say over whether or not a particular facility should be sited at this location. This bill would amend it so that it was given to the local authorities?
Yes, and we are opposing that bill. The Livestock Facilities Act came into being in the mid-1990s, was amended and readjusted in the later 1990s, and has worked very well for Illinois livestock producers to either build new facilities, expand their current facilities, providing opportunity for their sons and daughters or cousins nieces and nephews to come back to the farm and be a part of Illinois agriculture. It's worked very well, and it is a systematic approach through the permitting as well as the hearing process in siting those facilities.
So should the local authorities be granted any say over the siting of these facilities?
What there is now is in the hearing process, local authorities, local consumers and landowners have an opportunity to make comment and to voice their opinions at these hearings that goes through this permitting process. So there is input. They do have input into this entire process. And as I said earlier, it works well for the livestock producer that wants to do and expand or build a new facility, yet works with the communities and with the environment as we all go down the road and have livestock facilities in the community. Where's a better place than Illinois to raise livestock with all the natural resources that we have here? The corn, the soybeans, the soybean meal, the distillers' grains, everything is right here in Illinois. Why should we ship it out and have jobs go somewhere else when they can be right here in Illinois?
I assume that the Livestock Management Facilities Act has restrictions in terms of how close.
Yes, there's setbacks, all sorts of guidelines set up in it, and we adhere to those guidelines when you site or expand an existing facility.
But you understand those who oppose the Agriculture Department's siting ability and want to have local ones, you understand their concern because, and I believe it's 5,000 hogs can generate as much affluent as a city of 30,000 during a year.
Could very well be, and it's a very good byproduct for farmers to put on their fields. And there is what we call a Waste Management Act, or not act, but a process that you have to go through to make sure that you fill all the needs and you have a place for the byproducts from those livestock facilities to be placed on land.
And I want to talk about that in just a moment, but first I want to stay on the issue of, in particular, hogs. There's a proposal up near Winona for a large confinement facility with some hogs that's being considered right now. And I want to look at how the sow in particular is treated at this point in time. There are those who would suggest that the stalls, and if you haven't been in a confinement facility, there are stalls that are about 2 feet wide by 7 feet long. And a sow is in that facility. And right now there are those who suggest that maybe it should be a pen where the sows would mix. Mm-hmm. There is a report out of the University of Illinois that says that, well, maybe we should have stalls that as the sow gets bigger, as the sow moves through the process, that the sidewalls would flex. You could call them flex stalls. Do you have a position with regard to how sows should be treated?
Well, then we pretty much let that up to each individual farmer to use, and it's worked very well in a number of years in these facilities. When you have open housing, there are some challenges where you have domineering sows that fight, and there is a pecking order in a group of sows or gilts, and they would keep those that are less aggressive from getting to the feed bunk, having nutrients that they can, during the gestation period, that the pigs can grow and be really, do well at birth and have normal birth weights when they're born. There's caused injury not only to the other sows, but to the farmer himself when getting in and trying to control a sow that is very dominating.
So are we talking about a hog that might not get the nutrient and then might have a smaller litter, or?
Smaller litter, and it could have other issues. It can be have quite an impact on not only on the sow, but on the farmer's ability to care for the sows properly.
What about the proposal that, I believe this is in Europe, that you could have a pen, but the stalls are open so that the sow could retreat, so to speak, to the stall if that, if there was aggression or something of that nature?
Well, that works, and depends what kind of facility works best for you and for your farming operation. Some farmers, it causes a lot that you have to have a larger facility for those pens, and you can still have injuries with those sows. If you talk with Dr. Johnson from the University of Illinois, who works with sow behavior and has done a lot of studies with regard to this, she feels that it does have an impact on those sows and sow herds.
Let's move to an area where you do your farming, that's row crops. And you no doubt have run into a problem with herbicide-resistant weeds.
Palmer amaranth.
Palmer amaranth is a tall weed. For those of you that don't know, it can get taller than a human being. It's a giant weed. And it has developed, along with other giant ragweed, others, have developed a resistance to Roundup. And years ago, Monsanto had developed Roundup, which would kill almost all weeds, but would not damage the plants because there were resistant seeds. Nice combination in the field, but now the weeds are saying we don't recognize Roundup, more or less. That's what they're saying. Does the Farm Bureau, are you involved with any of this research? Are you in contact with Monsanto and the others in terms of how you might tackle this problem?
Absolutely, and we work with a number of universities, whether it's University of Illinois, SIU, Western, or Illinois State, on different technologies that we can use and different farming practices that are used on the farm, whether it be crop rotation, using different crop protectants, changing the chemical base in these crop protectants to reduce the resistance of those particular weeds in a particular crop. Just by changing the rotation from corn to soybeans or putting wheat into the mix provides an opportunity to use a different crop protectant that cuts down on the resistance of those weeds, or that you have different weed issues with different crops, and they're easier to control.
Are there farmers who might be going out there and maybe not using glyphosate or Roundup, same thing, but using some other chemical to try to control weeds? And is that a concern that we might be putting too much herbicide into the soil?
No, we're not using too much herbicides or crop protectants, what we call, but we're using different chemical bases in those crop protectants that changes the chemistry that affects the different types of weeds in different types of crops. And not only rotation, but there's new genetics coming out where we can use different products other than glyphosate on, let's say, soybeans in particular, where we have a dicamba bean now that is being developed that we use an altogether different chemical base and not Roundup or glyphosate on that crop.
Let's turn back to a legislative issue. A local senator, Senator Dave Kaler, you've met with him, I assume. Yes. He is proposing in Senate Bill 1666 GMO labeling. What concern might the Farm Bureau have with this particular bill?
Well, we've had a number of conversations with Senator Kaler over the last couple of years with regard to his interest in introducing a GMO bill, what we call. The problem is, a state law. If you look at, let's take a box of cornflakes and a manufacturer that produces that, not only sells that box of cornflakes in Illinois, they'll sell it in Missouri, Indiana, Iowa, Connecticut, California, just across the nation. It'd be very difficult and very expensive for the consumer if they have to have a different label for each product that goes into each and every state. And we're asking Senator Kaler to give it some consideration, and that we would look at federal standards that would be nationwide and one rule for all for a product, or labeling of the GMO products on whatever the product may be.
Let's talk about sustainability. You want to keep the soil on the land. You want to make sure that as little goes out into the rivers as possible in terms of nitrates, et cetera. What is the Farm Bureau doing to encourage farmers to be more conscious of that process, to make sure that whatever is put into the land stays in the land and doesn't go into water supplies, et cetera?
What we're doing, H, is we're working with what we call NREC, the Nutrient Research Education Council, and where farmers are taking $1 of every ton of crop nutrient that is sold here in Illinois goes into a fund where we do research and have discovery farms across the state that we can apply different farming practices and see what the results of those practices are, measuring the nitrate level, phosphorus level, or the runoff and erosion that comes off of those fields with the different farming practices, whether it's different applications of crop nutrients, different structures that can be used in on a field to control water flow or soil movement, or the use of cover crops on those crops to control and to hold those products where they're placed. At the same time, we use what we call vari-rate technology, where we vari-rate the amount of crop nutrient that goes on a particular field in specific amounts where it's specifically needed in a field. And it works very well.
So that references the point that we were talking about earlier with regard to hog effluent. Many farmers traditionally have knifed in
Yes.
ammonia nitrate, ammonium, anhydrous ammonia, which is nitrogen essentially. Are you trying to encourage farmers to stay away from putting a whole bunch of ammonium, nitrous ammonia into the soil?
Well, the research is still out, but one thing that we're looking at is different application rates and probably more applications of nitrogen on a particular field. Some of it, if you're in northern Illinois, you can apply some nitrogen in the fall. Like us, we in southern Illinois, we apply our nitrogen in the spring on a crop using anhydrous ammonia, or we use the liquid nitrogen sources, or the ureas are applied. And sometimes we're applying them 2 or 3 times during the growing season, depending on when is the best time to apply those products to the crop.
Why would that be different in northern Illinois as opposed to your farm down in southern
Because
Illinois?
of the temperature in the fall. You cannot apply nitrogens when the soil temperature is above 50 degrees or the ambient temperature is above 40 degrees.
Does the Farm Bureau have any concern with, and I'm going to use Monsanto, Monsanto's not the only company doing this, but they bought the Climate Corp.
Yes.
And then they bought Precision Planting over here in Tremont. They seem to be going after data. Are you concerned about this? It's almost like a vertical integration.
Well, I don't know if I'd call it vertical integration, but it is important to us in agriculture and as a farmer, because with the technology that we use today on the farm, whether it's in the combine, tracking our harvest data, whether it's planting in the spring and vari-rating the seed rates that go as you go through the field, the application of crop nutrients, whether it's nitrogen, phosphorus, or potash on your fields, that we apply them at where it's needed, when it's needed, in specific areas of the farm. But big data, we use it every day. Consumers are using it every day, and we on the farm find it really good to use. But the problem, I shouldn't say the problem, what we're trying to get our arms around, who owns the data that comes off of our combine or that goes into our tractor or planter? How is it used? Who has the rights to that data if it goes up in the cloud? How do we retrieve it out of the cloud? Who has access to that cloud? And then, I guess last result, is there any value in that data that the farmer provides? When it's either aggregated or used for any research project, how is it gotten out of the cloud and then how is it identified? Is it identified back to me, my specific field, my specific farm? Or is it everybody's farm put into a big pot that you don't know whose farm it is or what field it is? there's a lot of things to get our arms around and to find a protocol that we can work with. Now, later on this month, I think April 10th in Kansas City, the American Farm Bureau is bringing all of the industry and these groups together to talk about this protocol and the issues that has arisen from big data.
And we'll have to invite you back to find out the result of that, as we've run out of time for another half hour of At Issue. Rich Giebert, the president of the Illinois Farm Bureau, thank you so much for joining us on At Issue.
Well, thank you for inviting me in to be a part for your listeners.
And we'll be back next week with another edition of At Issue, when we're going to be talking to the mayors of Bloomington and Normal. We'll look long term what their vision for those two communities are next week here on At Issue.